Hello and welcome to Beyond the Horizon for episode 8, The Woman Who Thinks Like a Cow. Now, I have just unceremoniously dumped me and old media guy straight into it. Are you there?
I am, yes.
Awesome. From my looking at the stream on YouTube on my phone, it looks like we're both there. My arms are flapping around. I can only assume that sound is coming through. No weird noises, yes, old media guy?
No weird noises.
Okay. And nobody noticed my flatulence. Excellent.
Oh, you're a Slovene. I see.
Indeed. So we were having a little quick chat in the green room while attempting to help somebody else come onto the stream at the same time, with limited success. I do know that she can hear us at least, which is good. But yeah, you had a good idea of where to start our chat rolling.
Yes. One thing I noticed about Temple's story as presented in this documentary was they never talked about a very important point, and it's not a fault of the documentary makers. You've only got so much time. But perhaps one of the keys to this whole thing is she had to want to get out of her autism in order to be able to do so. It's not Autism is not something that you can escape from if you want to stay there. And I think I'm backed up by the evidence, despite the fact I'm not an expert in this field at all. I do remember other documentaries of severely autistic individuals lapsing back into their previous childhood behaviors simply because they didn't want to go any further. And there were cases where people wanted out of their behavioral rut, so to speak, and they got pretty far, but they were stuck when the funding ran out and they could not get access to a competent psychologist to help them. In other words, they wanted out, but they couldn't do it by themselves. And Temple didn't do it by herself. She had lots of help. So that's two things in the back of my mind, perhaps. And she wanted out and she had the help.
Yeah.
And I think the story of a lot of autistic people around the world is they want out, at least to a certain extent. They have the understanding there's this glimmer on the horizon. I want to get out of this. But if there's no help around them, if they're just being treated poorly or neglected or ignored, then they won't.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate then, since you've raised this topic. Isn't there a danger in what you're saying of blaming those with autism for being autistic if we think that they are just not making an effort to get out of their trap?
The thing is, if you're in that trap, you don't know it's a trap, right? It's like Shakespeare said, how did he put it? I'm going to mangle his words here. I could live inside the shell of a walnut and declare myself the king of infinite space. If that's all you have, of course you think it's just fine. But it's always up to the parents, the family, the surrounding community to show a young child there's more than you can see, right? You're 4, you're 5, you're 6. You're not going to see everything. You're hardly going to see anything. But the kid is convinced they're seeing it all. And it's up to the larger community to say, here's more. And it's to introduce it in a nice, quiet, gentle way. You don't hit them over the head with a math book. You just say, hey, did you know that, 1 plus 100 is 101? It's like, what? Some kids respond to that. Some respond to music, some to art, some to theater, some to engineering, so what have you. But you have to expose them to it. And with autistic kids, you've got to work just a little bit harder.
Yes, but in your example you just gave, that's not them choosing to remain autistic. That's them just simply being ignorant of or unaware of there is another way to be.
Right. And that's kind of the point. And to further my point, everyone goes through a phase where they realize, I am not everything I thought I was. Normally that happens in your teenage years. You start to realize, this little mental world I had for myself when I was 10, it doesn't work now that I'm 14. There's so much more intruding in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do one of two things with that, really. One is to say, all right, I have to get rid of the stuff I had, the mental edifices, as it were, that I was holding on to. I have to abandon those and start learning this new world, how to navigate it directly. Or you retreat back and go, nope, I'm going to live in my imaginary world, if you will, where I'm the little king, the big fish in the small pond. And that's where I'm going to remain. And I've known people like that. They were that way in their 30s. They're that way in their 70s.
Now you mentioned that. I mean, I think possibly the majority of people or humans on this planet actually live in that state to some degree, where they stop progressing, they stop learning, they stop regenerating, if you like.
There is that, but let's be fair to the bulk of humanity. How do we keep up with the latest trends in psychology or in anatomy and physiology or in cosmology or in music? I mean, you just cannot keep up with everything.
But
So
okay,
perhaps
I agree. I agree. But maybe you're thinking too big. I mean, to
could
generate,
be.
to learn, to progress doesn't mean to know everything, to learn everything, to become everything. It just
No,
means
no,
to
no.
make that tiny little step beyond.
Because we are so limited as individuals, you do have to get to a point where you acknowledge there's more information out there than I will ever obtain. There's more wisdom that is required to handle these things than I will ever obtain.
Yeah.
And you can do one of two things. One is you can become a braggart, someone who's just obsessed with the idea that they're right and you can't teach me nothing. Or
Yeah.
you can become like at least we're trying to be, which is to say we're not experts, we don't know. We'll
Yeah.
present an opinion, but if we're wrong, we're wrong. That's a much nicer way to live because you're not fighting with so many people all the time for this imaginary supremacy you believe you have.
Yeah. I mean, what we live for are those tiny, incremental, tiny, almost infinitesimally small gains we make as we
Yeah.
understand a tiny fragment more than what we did before. But obviously, we hopefully are all fully aware of the infinite expanse of stuff we don't know beyond that.
Yes. In fact,
We
you can
hope.
even, there's even a proof that is fairly easy to write or read right in mathematics to show
Mm.
there's an infinite amount of knowledge that will never ever be learned. It doesn't matter how long the human race lasts, doesn't matter how long the universe lasts, you'll never know it.
Is there a name for that? I mean, not that it helps me either way, but for other people who might know this stuff.
Oh, it has to do with how infinity works, and there's different levels of infinity.
Oh,
So the basic
that,
level of infinity is you've got a bag full of Skittles that never empties, or M&Ms, or
mm,
what? Pick your candy. Every time
hmm
you reach in to get one, there's always an infinite supply left. So never
yes,
turn that bag over, right? Just never do
yeah,
it.
hmm
The second level infinity could be described as something that's actually horrifically bad, which is as soon as someone opens up this other bag with this larger infinity, Skittles, M&Ms, whatever, flood the universe to the point where even the universe itself is extinguished because there's nothing left but these objects. And then the objects continue to spill out forever and ever for the rest of time, even though
because the
they've
universe
actually
you
used
have,
up all the time there is.
because the
And
universe is negligible compared to the infinite thing you've just unleashed. You mean, yeah?
right, yeah, the universe would be the drop of water compared to this mountain range of stuff that keeps flowing out of this second level of infinity. And there's
Wow.
one beyond that, and one beyond that, and one beyond that. So it's
Yes.
not hard to see that there's an infinite amount of information we'll never know.
Well, I'm
So
just
you
realizing.
better get used to the idea and perhaps be a little humble about that and humble about what you do know, because even if you are one of the best, say, musicologists in the planet, there's always going to be someone out there who's better than you.
Yeah, well, God, yes. I think that's pretty much true of every field of expertise ever. There's
Yeah,
always somebody who
yeah.
knows more than you in it. Even the one you're supposed to be working in, even the one you're meant to be an expert in, there are way more. There are loads of people who know more than you. I mean, a little bit. That's not entirely true. I mean, there are probably fewer people who know more than you than there are who don't. If you're already an expert in the field, but you should be. Everyone should be mindful that I know that there's most people who worked in cosmology are better than me. Yeah, that's just
Yeah, that's how it
that's
works for most
true.
of us. Yeah, you
Yeah,
know far more than me, but there's these people ahead of you that know far more than you. And if we were all kind of humble about it, we could actually get a lot done.
yeah, exactly.
And the
Yeah,
other thing, and there's another factor to this. Imagine you are one of the top 5 beings on the planet for whatever it is you do. I
yeah,
mean, it's literally when people say who are the best, your name always shows up somewhere in the top 5 list, always.
yeah.
You still need to look for the new talent, the rising new talent, and find a way for them to someday perhaps take your spot
Hmm.
because you won't be in the top 5 forever.
Yes, that's kind of another reason why we're here doing stuff which is, I guess, education related. What we're doing right now is to hopefully bring out people who will do better than us later.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, because everyone, everywhere has some sort of regret. Um, you'll find that some of the great artists or achievers of our lifetime wanted to be something else. like Shakespeare famously wanted to be this lyric poet. Instead, he was stuck writing plays, which was about 2 levels above porn in his day. And somehow he managed to write plays that seemed to transcend his culture and time and humanity, just like the great playwrights of ancient Greece. So sometimes it happens that someone's very successful, but they're always looking over their shoulder saying, I wish I would have been this other thing.
Hang on. So what did he want to be?
Well, if you look at his poems, his sonnets and his longer pieces, Phoenix and the Turtle, I'm trying to remember the titles, that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be remembered as that. He wanted to be remembered as the poet.
Huh.
And instead, he was writing poetry for the stage, which was normal at the time. He wrote it in poetry, wrote it in meter. And he wanted to do this other thing. He was stuck doing this thing he didn't want to do, so he found a way to make a bridge between the two.
And hence his plays became poetic.
Yeah.
Poetry. You reminded me that apparently Plato wanted to be a playwright, first of all, and started out writing plays, which were apparently not well received. But one of the most striking things about his philosophical works, his dialogues, they are plays. They are character interactions between predominantly the central character of Socrates and his surrounding field of friends or enemies in some cases. But the arguments are dramatic. That if you read Plato's dialogues, they are plays, they are dramas, they are what he wanted to do originally, but now in a different way, and again gave us something that the world would not be the same without.
Yeah. And probably one of the best success stories of this type would be Tolkien, because his day job was philology, which is the history of words, and he would say, "Well, I
not stamp collecting."
Pardon? Stamp collecting?
Philology, isn't that stamp collecting?
No. So he would be given a manuscript in this language as a student, and he would be told, decipher this. And that's what he'd have to do. He'd have to learn the language, and he'd been studying languages for a long time, so it wasn't that hard, but he'd have to learn the language. And then he would learn the words, and then he would learn what the words were trying to convey, usually in the form of a story. And he said, my first impulse was not to study the text as a philologist would, but to try to write something just like this thing he just read.
Yes.
And that's one reason he was so good at his job, was he wasn't just looking at these dry words going, well, this is what this means, this is what that means. Like, no, this is why the author used this word instead of that word, because it conveyed this feeling.
Yeah.
And that's what he really liked. I mean, he was doing his job, but what he really liked was enjoying these stories and the languages they were written in. And when he tried to copy them for his kids, next thing you knew, he had a bestseller in his hands. And the publisher said, write a sequel. He's like, sure, not a problem. Just give me a year or two. And then 17 years later, he comes out with one of the best works of the 20th century.
Yes. The serendipity of history.
Well, serendipity, and it's also, how do you put it? It's engagement.
Yeah.
He wasn't a wallflower hanging back going, oh, I couldn't do that. He was this poor Catholic kid at a time when being poor and Catholic in England was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Let's not forget what just happened yesterday in the UK, a celebration of burning Catholics.
Yes. We've gone so far off topic, but you've now reminded me of something else I want to mention that is off topic. But yesterday, as you correctly identified, was November the 5th, fireworks night. And I live next to Crystal Palace Park. And there's always been a fireworks display, except not this year. I don't know why. I don't know if this is like austerity to the max. They can't afford fireworks anymore. But there were no fireworks. And not official ones. Anyway, there were unofficial ones going off in gardens all over the place. But no huge display in the park behind me. Very weird. Now, we should probably try and get back on the topic again.
We must.
Autism and Asperger's. So I asked you the question in the green room. I said, do you think you're autistic? And you said, yes, I think. If that's not,
I think so, yeah. I've got enough of the symptoms. I would imagine it's highly likely, yes.
So what made you think you were? Because I guess
was, huh? Well, like they say in the documentary, the best way to diagnose a child is their behavior. So in real life, you need a doctor, you need the child to uh, visit the doctor watches the child play and interact with others. I get, okay, all that stuff. I didn't have that, so I kind of put two and two together. One was I never understood why the people on TV were making these weird faces. So I
Right.
remember about the age of 4, I started trying to imitate the faces on TV to see if I could understand why they were doing it. And it actually wasn't a good idea because when a 4-year-old is trying to imitate someone screaming, you become frightened, and a frightened
Yeah.
4-year-old, it's very hard to calm down.
Yes.
And the anxiety she talked about, yeah, I had that all the time.
Huh.
So just that's a very short version. That's basically it, looking back at my childhood and saying, yeah, this fits, this fits. That part doesn't fit, but that's okay because it's a spectrum of
Yeah.
disorders and such. So there it is.
Yeah, I mean, I had various things that you could tick off the boxes. Like I didn't make eye contact very easy for a long time. In fact, to
Mm.
the point that I know it was a conscious effort, and now it's second nature. But I often stare too much into people's eyes because of that conscious effort I made to make eye contact. Yeah,
Oh, I
which
remember that now. Yes, that's right. I wouldn't do it. I
that
had
might
to
ring
force
bells
myself.
for many people. Yes.
Yeah.
I also couldn't. I mean, there was a lot of bullying went on. Like my entire secondary school experience was hell on earth, from like age 11 to about 15/16. It was all nothing but shite run one or the other in
Mhm.
terms of the crap got from the kids. And I remember at the earlier end of that, 11, 12, I couldn't understand how they couldn't see what was going on in my head through my eyes. How can you not see how
Mhm.
much you're causing me pain? My concept of mind was not well formed at even age 11 and 12, which is a little late not to have a more adult concept of mind.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember that as well. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I remember not registering what they were feeling when I interacted with them until they started to cry. And then I realized I'd gone too far. So it
Yeah.
works both ways. You can be the bullied or the bullier, and
Oh, yeah,
neither
yeah.
are good.
Oh, no, no, no. But yes, but again, my best friend Ella would not says I'm definitely not autistic Asperger's, and that might be because many of these things, many of the boxes don't tally up. But it also could be, and I suspect this may be true of you too, actually, that we've both learned to cover whatever autistic traits we had very, very well.
Yes, and it's important to do that to a certain extent. But there is some data to show that people who are on the spectrum, you have to use a whole lot of energy. It's like overclocking your CPU to
Hmm.
fit in with normal people, which is why we'll often say retreat to a room on a Sunday and live stream instead of being in a crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I, is that your phone going off, or is it something of my
It's
end?
not my phone. I
All
don't
right,
have
good.
phones.
It's something over here. Don't worry about it. So I got distracted by noise. It's like Temple Grandin. I was running out of the room in a second to get rid of that horrible distraction. Um, I won't because I've learned not to do that. Um,
Right.
what was I saying? I've forgotten now. Oh wait, no. Um, yes, learning to cope and the tiredness of the interactions. So I got through various mechanisms. I got quite good. I went from being, the horrible time I had at secondary school to coming out the end of secondary school and suddenly being free of the shackles of caring what other people thought, for example, and was able to suddenly turn the tables entirely on any bullies there were because I didn't care. One, what they thought anymore, and two, I didn't really have much physical fear either. So it wasn't going to, you're going to try and beat me up. Go on, take your best shot. So things
Yeah.
I was suddenly go on.
No, yeah, I completely agree. You have to get to that point where the bullies are like, well, it's not worth picking on you. It's like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it was a complete flip right at the end of my schooling. But after that, I discovered I was using alcohol a lot in my social life so I could continue to be sociable because
Hmm.
I wouldn't notice how exhausted I was getting as as a night wore on in a social setting. It's tiring to be
It is.
social. It's tiring to
Oh, yes.
maintain that eye contact, to maintain that banter. And for a long time, I think I was probably using drinks to help smooth me through those social situations. Now I don't have to. Now, to be fair, I barely drink at all these days, and I can still maintain this. But the exhaustion will, at some point, you will tire out. Is that because we're
Yes.
autistic, or is that just normal?
Well, it's hard to say because shyness and being gregarious is not actually tied with being an introvert or an extrovert, right? They're
No.
two different dimensions. And you can be a shy extrovert and a gregarious introvert.
Hmm.
Gregarious introvert is someone who just loves to be with people but can't do it that long. So
Yeah.
how much of it is Asperger's or autism? How much of that is being introvert? I don't know. That would definitely be one for an expert. And poor Anita's not able to log in
I
and
know.
join us. She's having
We've got
trouble. And
two.
she's
I've got two Anitas in the bottom of the thing, neither of which I can connect because it says
oh
device is not
no,
connected.
that's too
And
bad.
I wish. I mean, I wish I could actually go onto her computer and press the settings button at the bottom and say, "Are
I
you sure you
know.
haven't turned on the thingy?" But I can do it on mine, but
And the
not on
kiosk is saying, I find myself agreeing with old media guy in all of this, same circumstances. And I think that's a lot of what happened, at least in American education. I don't know what's happening right now, but
Go
in
on.
previous decades, like say my generation, the slow kids all got the extra help, and us smart kids, quote unquote, smart kids, were basically left to fend for ourselves. Like, oh, well, you can just go read or do whatever. Well, it doesn't mean what I'm reading is constructive. In my case,
Mm.
I was reading comic books. Nothing wrong with the comic books, but they are not the zenith of Western literature. And if you're actually mentoring a kid, you say, oh, if you like comic books, you might like the Greek myths. You
Yeah.
might like to have some connection with this older culture that you aren't aware of because you're 8 or whatever. So, and perhaps that's what happened to the kiosk and others, is that,
Yeah.
yeah, the parents were counting on the school system to fix the problem. The school system was saying, well, you seem to be bright, and we're going to put you to the side and take care of the slower kids so they can become good employees someday.
Yeah. No, when I was going through school, I mean, I'm only like a few years younger than you, but and I'm talking about the UK system now, not the US. They got even when I was in primary school, they were switched on for things like oh god, dyslexia, for example.
Hmm.
That they could deal with, and they had interventions for that. But yeah, uh, they tried to help me in secondary school because they could see how much I was suffering and why, but they didn't have much tools to do it. They didn't
Hmm.
know how to deal with someone who was behaving as I was, who was clearly tormented by the kids, didn't have mechanisms internally to cope with it, and they couldn't figure out how to install those, or even what was causing any underlying problems. If there was an autistic or Asperger's linked root cause for that behavior as well, there was nothing in place at that time to do it. Now there kind of is, because I have experience on the other end, from the other side, in terms of identifying people with problems. And we do it, although it's still not perfect in the secondary school system, but at least there's an awareness of it now. In fact, an increasing awareness of it.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
And I think that's what we meant by bright kids. I think you meant bright kids with a definite condition like autism, Asperger's, yeah?
Well, just the kids who seem intelligent enough to self-guide to a certain extent. The error I think my schools made was assuming because the child can self-guide a little bit, we're just going to let the child take care of their own problems while we deal with the slower kids.
Yeah,
That,
that's
I mean, okay, how many ways is that wrong? It's wrong in all sorts of ways. One is the kid can't self-guide that far. They're only 6, 7, 8, or 9. Second,
yes.
why would a society put all of its resources into the slower kids and not into the kids who are probably going to grow up and have the quote unquote important jobs someday? I mean, can you imagine what a country might look like if it was ruled by a class of elites who are really badly educated but still thought very highly of themselves? Can you imagine the damage they would cause? Vote on Tuesday if you're an American.
Yeah, I think this is the constant struggle in education is, do we stream them or do we do mixed ability? Um, do we put them into sets or do we let them all mix together and hope that we can somehow provide an education in one classroom that will fit all of them? There are obviously goods, pluses and minuses to both sides, but I do tend to uh, lean towards the streaming one because I went through streaming. I've taught streamed and mixed ability in a certain context, and actually, I've taught the lowest ability people in a certain
Mhm.
context, and done a really, pat myself on the back, done a really good job of getting them to
Good.
places they never thought they would be. So
That's
just because
excellent.
you've streamed them doesn't mean you've abandoned the bottoms there. That's the worst possible way you've done it if you do that. I do.
Yes.
I lean towards the streaming in the short answer to what you said.
Yes, in credit to the giving credit to the school system I went to, about the time I was 15 or so, they had begun to completely revamp the lower grades
Mm,
so that because it wasn't just me, there was a whole bunch of us who were really smart, and I'm not trying to brag there, but we were. I mean, I remember taking a math aptitude test, and I came out second in the entire school district. And that part, I don't go to bed happy with myself because of that. I go to bed a little sad because the school system's response to that was to say, "Oh, well, that's where you are."
mm.
Crickets.
Not where you can go.
It's like,
Yeah,
okay, what do you mean? I just am this good? I mean, don't you think that if I'm me and I mean, I know the guy who was a excuse me, I there was a guy ahead of me, actually tied for second place. So let's say there's three of us in the school district who are considered really, really good.
yeah, yeah.
Why don't you have a class for us? You know, it's not elitist to say, you kids are really doing well. How about we see exactly where you are and
Mm.
try to move you forward so that when you get to algebra and later calculus, you won't be going, what's this? I've never seen it before. No, they just said, oh, you're fine. You're one of the smart kids.
Well, you'll be
What?
pleased to hear that officially in this country we have gifted and talented as a thing in schools. That if they
Hmm.
are better, that there are if they are better. I have these language has to be used. If they are better at doing certain things than other people, we do give them the ability to fly and shine and learn more. That's what gifted and talent is all about, and it's in the state and the private sector. They all know about it and they all do it. At least they should. I mean, the state
They
sector is
should,
still under
yeah.
state
Over here
sector
in
is
this
still
country,
underfunded here, and it's often things slip through the cracks. Actually, in the private sector, sometimes a school may just not be paying enough attention to what its staff is doing, and things may fall through the cracks. But
yes,
it's
yes.
there in the it's built into the systems now, so it should be that
That's
with here. I
good.
don't know about the US though. You have to tell me.
Well, the teachers unions have a stranglehold over here, which are they're basically keeping the K through 12 system as close to ideal for them as they possibly can. When all of the data suggests if you want kids to succeed better, you have smaller classroom sizes.
Yeah,
That's it. Once you have a classroom with a teacher and four students, nobody can get away with anything. And of course, that's expensive. So, what happens? The
yes.
politicians send their kids to schools where that happens, and the rest of us go to school where there's 20, 30 kids in the room, and the teacher does the best they can. And
Uh-huh.
I'm overgeneralizing here because this isn't every school district, but that's what can happen. And but that is the impetus as to why so many American families are homeschooling. It's not that they're anti-government. It's not that they're religious wackos. It's they're saying this isn't working for my kid in all sorts of ways, so I'm going to pull them out. Will the homeschool be more effective than the regular school? Who knows? It's one of those cherry picking moments where the homeschooling advocates will only tell the success stories and the other side will only show the will only talk about the instances where it failed. But
Yeah.
sometimes it will work because, for example, in this country, if a kid is really good at acting or dancing or mathematics or shop classes or what have you, it's possible they won't get the attention they need, and the parents simply have to make the decision to pull the kid out and let the kids begin to specialize. And if I had one major gripe against the US school system, at least as I went through it and my daughter went through it, it's that they did not allow enough specialization. It's like, no, you all have to learn the same thing till you turn 18. Well, that's ridiculous. How much algebra did Mozart know? You know?
We could argue about this as well. I have opinions on how specialized and how broad you should be at various ages too, because I've taught systems where I've had experience or exposed to systems where it's been possible to be very narrow and one where it's much broader. For example, in this country, we have our 16 to 18 qualifications are called A levels. But there's also the International Baccalaureate, which is an international standard run by a company essentially that are based elsewhere. I forget, were they based in Switzerland? I think it might have been. But anyway, they impose a level of breadth from 16 to 18. And I actually think their kids do generally come out better off than those who say, right, I'm just like I did at school and went, I'm going to do maths, physics. What did I do? Maths, physics, chemistry, and we had to do general studies as a fourth one. But I was really focus down onto just maths, and I think I could have benefited from having a slightly broader curriculum thrust upon me until uni, where you kind of have to specialize.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I would not want to subject a kid to just math and science ever, because at some point they're going to need to know that there's somebody else out there who thinks the way they do, or somewhat similar to the way they do. There's only so much that people like you and I can do on that front. People like Dickens or Dostoevsky have done much better work showing how real people live and think and breathe and eat and so on. And sometimes you're going to connect with a book that was written 150 odd years ago in a country you've never been in than you will with a kid next door who's all into football. It's just going to happen. And knowing those authors are out there and who they are and what they wrote, that can be of tremendous help to a young person, even if they're going into the STEM area where they don't, in the American sense, they don't need that stuff. They don't need the liberal arts. Well, they do need the liberal arts. Everyone needs literature, music, painting, and dance, and so on.
I mean, to be fair, potentially, I kind of already knew that as a kid at 16, 18, because I wanted to continue my English, at least at AS, which is half an A level. But my English teacher said, well, you've picked 3 really tough subjects there, and you're not very, you're a little bit lazy, so don't do the English yet. Come back to it later. And he was right. I mean, I was lazy, and it was hard enough for me to do what I'd chosen. And I did come back to the English later, but I think a lot of kids wouldn't have been as mindful as me of my own weaknesses, and as mindful as my English teacher was of my weaknesses. So yeah, I think encouraging people away from specializing too much is back to my original point. What I would go down these days, I'd say make them go a little broader until they go to uni.
Yeah, there is certainly a case for specialization. I would say at some point you have to start narrowing down the breadth of what you're asking the child to take in, but you should never narrow it down completely. So you do math and science, and that's it forever and ever. Amen. There has to be an escape valve somewhere in there where the other side of your brain can take over.
Yes, I agree. We have 3 Anitas, by the way.
We have 3 Anitas
now?
now?
No. I said that. As soon as I said there are 3 Anitas, now there are 2. So whatever I said made one disappear. But
I think the kiosk should change his name to Anita and then try to get in. I think that'd be hilarious. Get I'll change my name too. I'm not above that.
Well, everyone's Anita.
Everyone's Anita.
Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce. Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce. Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce. Can't we just change your name to Bruce? Make things simpler.
might cause a little bit of confusion.
Monty Python. May you never die.
Yeah, some of the Monty Python stuff really is timeless comedy. It really is excellent.
Some of it is terrible, but
some of it's. Oh yeah, I don't know how they haven't been canceled yet, to be honest.
Well, I was actually not referring to the non-PC aspects. I was just saying some of it literally was just badly written, not very funny stuff. But there was a lot of it.
There was some of that too. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Same with the Goon Show. There's some Goon Show where you're just kind of cringing, and there's others where you're like, how did he come up with this? Spike Milligan was brilliant.
Yeah. He's very inconsistent. That's the word I want to grab. Yeah. But a genius.
Yeah.
I still occasionally reach for Spike Milligan. I've got his autobiographies. I've got some of the weird cartoon drawing things he did in books. It's just...
Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I read about 5 of those.
Mm-hmm. I can see a third Anita, but I'm suspicious. I don't think that's the real Anita. This Anita has a beard.
That would be awesome.
The flaw in his plan. Yes, maybe we should let the kiosk in. Oh, but before we let him in, was there anything else we should have talked about on autism Asperger's?
Well, considering we're not experts, I'm not sure we should say too much more.
Very true. Although autism Asperger's, we're way more aware of it in this country in terms of the education system now. But oh God, you're right.
Yep, I'm fine.
That must be this end doing something weird. But even 12 years ago, when I was involved in the education system at a certain level, I helped identify a kid who had definitely was on the spectrum, really obviously on the spectrum, but there was no way of identifying that as a learning difficulty. You could get statements for various things, dyscalculia, dyslexia, any number of things. You could actually say, oh, they've got this, therefore you will have these considerations made for exams, for example. But autism, Asperger's, no. So I had to find a literacy-based label that I could stick on them to give them extra time in their physics A-levels. It was just ridiculously difficult to get help. I'm hoping 12 years later, this is no longer the case.
Yes, I know what you mean. I was lucky enough to teach at a small college where we were allowed as professors to be more hands-on with students that we knew were legitimately struggling. And as often is the case in America, the 18-year-olds were struggling because they didn't study, and the returning adults were struggling because they had a husband, a wife, kids, a part-time job, juggling 8 balls in the air at once. And I had this marvelous student. She's one of those people you want to adopt. She was just so wonderful. She was taking my very first exam in this class, and I thought she was doing okay. And she was the last person working on the test. So I said, well, how you doing? And she just kind of looked at me with this look that just spelled tragedy. And she had made these indecipherable scribblings on the first problem. That's as far as she got.
Ooh.
And I thought she was doing well, and she was just in panic mode, literally grasping at straws on this first problem and not getting anywhere. And I said, well, I need to stop this for now, but just give me a moment to think. And I took her test, and I went back to my office, which wasn't far from the classroom, and just sat. And I'm thinking, and I'm thinking, and I'm thinking. And she kind of comes in and looks at me like, is my career over? Have I just shot my entire undergraduate career in the foot, considering A, she needed this to graduate, B, she needed a master's after this that required this class. I mean, this was life or death to her in a certain sense. And I said, I think the problem is you're panicking. I don't think it's you don't know the material. I think that the classroom setting is causing you anxiety. She says, yes. And she's very truthful, so I believed her when she said that. Said, here's what I'm going to do. And this is the first time I've ever revealed this to the general public. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to print out the test again. You're going to take it home, and you're going to do the test tonight in your time. You're going to tell your husband to watch the kids. You can use any resource you want except a living person. You can't chat online with a living person, can't talk to a living person, but you can use any resource you want online. Yes. And you just do this in your time and bring it back to me by 9 a.m. the next day. I want to see what you do with it. And she came back with a B test. That's rated as a B. And that's what told me it was not that she was incapable. It's that she was panicking. And what we did the next test was say, look, if you do fine on this test here in the classroom, great. If not, we'll just do what we did last time. So the panic went way down. And by the end, I think she got like a low A as a final grade in the class because we were able to do that.
Good.
And I realize not every teacher can do that with every student in every situation. But that's really what education is. When the admin isn't pushing you into a corner, it's to have a small enough class to get to know the people, to know this person's failing because they're drinking all the time, but this person's failing just because they're panicking. And if we change the parameters of how the test is taken, they'll be fine.
There are so many things I could talk about on that subject, but I was going to say we should let Anita in, but
yes,
the Anita with the beard has
let all the Anitas in. Well,
the other Anita is still there, but I can't let her in because her devices are still not connected. Wait. I noticed you're an Anita as well. You are all the Anitas, in fact. I'm going to let the kiosk in. Let's see what he has to say.
Okay.
Hello. You're in a weird shape.
All right. I'm going to try and not make everyone motion sick, but I don't really have a good place to set my phone for camera. Maybe that.
Why are you so thin and tall?
It's on vertical mode, apparently.
Okay.
My phone sits for the best reception. I'm on my front patio.
Okay. So tell us about your autism and Asperger's experiences. Are you autistic?
But I have no diagnosis. But I am divorced. My former stepson was diagnosed with ASD, which is very much Asperger's. Asperger's is not really used as a diagnosis term anymore.
By the way, being divorced is not, I think, a sign of autism Asperger's. That's way too broad. I mean, otherwise we're going to have a lot of people.
No. I'm just saying for personal history, without getting any deeper into it. That's how I come to have a previous stepson. He's out there doing his thing.
Oh, now I understand the link. Yeah, it was nothing.
I'm sorry.
Please let the other need to in Dr. Alex look. I will if I can, but I can't.
She's asking you please to let her in, so she may have gotten everything installed.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll just say my own personal experiences. I do have the same kind of set as what old media guy just said about, over time. And that's how they diagnose, is over time. Long-term behavioral use certain things. And I have certain days, certain cadences, all this other stuff. Part of it, I think, comes from my dad, who is exactly like his dad, and there's kind of a male line thing going on there. To some ancestors that were originally like royal armorers in Scotland. But
that explains your hat.
No, that's one I came across that I was like, ooh, that's like the one from Catcher in the Rye. So I got two. Now I can't. But myself, it's just, I have certain behaviors, certain ways. I am very prone to logic, but I'm very aware of the fact that not everyone else is, and also kind of aware of the fact that most people in my position are not aware of that. Some people have meltdowns. People, it's mythic. You hear about it, kind of thing, at least.
Yeah.
And
it's always funny. The neurotypicals never get our meltdowns. Like if we have a meltdown, it's because a whole lot of things have gone a whole lot wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like we were on the edge of falling off the earth anyway, and then this one more thing happened, and we lose it. And they're like, man, you really lost it that day. And all you can do is respond and say, you should see me when I'm really upset.
I do. On the point of your parents, I'm not an expert in autism Asperger's. However, I have seen someone who is. I have discussed it with people who are experts in psychology. In fact, I went to a lecture by Simon Baron-Cohen, now Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, who is an expert in autism Asperger's. And one of the things you mentioned, apart from is that this running in the family is not entirely unknown. In fact, often, even if the parents have not been diagnosed, which often was because it wasn't diagnosed very well for a long time, when they look at the children and then look at the parents, they find the parents are often engineers themselves, or scientists, or physical scientists, natural scientists, mathematicians. And worse, if you have two of them together, the likelihood of producing an autistic child goes up through the roof. Having systematizing inclined adults producing children together does seem to up the chances of you having an autistic child. Yes.
Yeah.
But there are people who are not neurodivergent. They are not autistic, but they have many of those traits. And so that's where mine is hazy, because I don't know. I'm obviously more than most. There's other times I have some very Yoda speak kind of moments trying to express myself.
Well, it is a spectrum as well. It's not, as I think we've said a million times, it's not like, you've crossed the line, bang, you're autistic. You're just the other side of the line, you're not. Well, nah, it's not like that.
No, it's not only a continuum. I think it's probably a surface, meaning there's at least 3 dimensions. And if you go extreme in any one of them, you'll be called autistic, but it doesn't mean you'll be like the person next to you who's also been labeled as autistic.
Yeah.
Have either of you seen I think it was a PBS special, but it might not have been, but it was called Autism is a World. It was about a girl.
No, I haven't. Although, funny you should mention PBS. I do want to get hold of more PBS stuff, because the next one I want to show is actually one of the few PBS videos I have, and it's awesome. But anyway, tell me about this one.
It's about a girl that her entire life they thought she was mentally retarded because she had a complete inability to communicate. And then one day she got a hold of a little thumb typing like IQ 205, just hanging out, not going to school. And once they found out she could communicate, they were like, oh my gosh, there's a person in there. And it was like that my understanding of it, as her description was, is that there's a disconnect between mind and body sometimes, and that was the thing that tied it. I was mentioning it in the chat about Temple. Kind of the. I definitely agree with that notion, because it's like in the worst times of heightened fear where your instincts kick in, it's like to, you know, not react in a certain something, and so it's like the act of not having a meltdown as opposed to having a meltdown or whatever, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
For me,
what was her condition? Was it also autism, or was it a different one?
Yeah, yes, it was very strong autism where you know, it almost looked like she could be like Down syndrome or something, but she wasn't. It was a very, like, her facial, you know, it's like the real autism is like there's a definite the affect is almost schizophrenic. Oftentimes, like, okay, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys, people will describe him as, I've seen him and I've seen him talk, I've seen him music. He's autistic and he's a musical genius. He is not schizophrenic. Yeah. But sometimes, like, you know, okay, and it's like that doesn't mean, you know, it's a similar thing, but it's not the same. Yeah, and that's kind of the gag with Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye, is that he's institutionalized for some schizophrenic thing, and it's like, having read the book, I'm not sure that that's the case. That's the book, I think, and so for everyone like that, I wear this.
Gotcha. Dr. Alex, I have to skedaddle.
I sensed that was happening, or it could be my sense of time, but yes.
Thank you for having me on. It was awesome. Thank you, Kiosk. This was marvelous. I'm sorry, and multiple Anitas, we couldn't get you on, but hopefully we'll get these text problems.
I just want to say before you leave, sir, I just want to say I legitimately agreed with everything that you've said on this one. And I don't mean like, oh, before I was like, I'm just saying here you've said some things that I'm glad that other people see that in the world. Again, it's like,
I knew we didn't have to let the kiosk in because Old Media Guy had it covered.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, no, that's why I was like, all right, what am I going to add to this? I'm going to step away.
With that, I'm going to go. Take care, you all.
Thank you. Thank you. And then there were two. Are you okay there? You're breaking up quite a bit, at least from my end.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it just cuts out every so often. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. Oh, I can see an Anita, but again, devices are not connected. I can't let you in unless you have a microphone at least.
Is this any better, or
no? You're good, actually. Yeah, that does sound better. But Anita is sitting there with devices not connected, and I can't let her in because there's not even a microphone. I'm sorry, Anita. I really want.
I just want to say, for my experiences, self-diagnosing, it's there were initially, I was diagnosed professionally as bipolar. They almost wouldn't accept bipolar as my diagnosis, this therapist, until I started describing some things that then made them look it up. And it was the situation where they will take people with like borderline, that the state, if like I was on an insurance through an employer, and there's also the state coverage depending on where they have, you know, for their healthcare provision, that there are certain rules as to what is or is not treatable. And borderline is an untreatable illness, but bipolar is not. And some bipolar drugs do kind of help sometimes because bipolar might be involved.
Sorry, what was the one they thought it was not? If it wasn't bipolar, what was the other option? I couldn't quite catch it.
Borderline personality disorder, which I don't think is the case for me. But what it was is that my rapid cycling was entirely too fast, like way too fast. They're like, no, it doesn't do that. I was like, well, it's doing it here. And after I was diagnosed, about a year and a half later, my type of bipolar that I believe I actually have was added to the DSM, which is like ultradian cycle, I think is what they call it.
Oh, okay. Can you
under the highest stress moments, I can have a full course, a complete sinusoidal mood swing of all conditions within about 15-20 minutes.
So hang on. And pardon me if I'm using archaic terminology here, but is this what used to be described as manic depression?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, then I do know where we are. Okay,
and the actual manic depressive part is where you have a mixed state between the up and the down at the same time, and it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Something that I can't recall it directly now, but something that Old Media Guy just said that kind of related to that too. It had to do with self-danger in a way, I think. that's the most dangerous time, and going through those moments, and other people are like, bro, just relax. And it's like, sometimes those meltdowns are that kind of thing, where, if everyone's on a spectrum, and then you have these hereditary behaviors, autism like, and then bipolar is often hereditary as well. My mom had a lot of signs of it, but she couldn't. There's a denial that most people have of it that she just wouldn't. That's like, if you're watching on YouTube, you will see advertisements for bipolar.
Yeah.
Just an antidepressant, bipolar, that doesn't help. You need a mood stabilizer, and you don't need an antidepressant. It stops you from, instead of doing, let me get it on camera, doing this thing, it just kind of levels you. You don't need an antidepressant when you have that, but the denial prevents the individual from actually seeking the proper help. So they give them this other thing instead, which might actually be a mood stabilizer, but they're calling it this thing for bipolar depression. It's like a way of navigating actual manics into help through it's kind of weird. But my thing was, I was a very literal person. I believe that, if I couldn't touch, see, hear it, or know about it through the official science channels, and by channels I mean not
YouTube. I know you mean
way before through those means. But I had decided to seek enlightenment, or find something other than just the mundane, and was able to open up some significant spiritual experiences that, in that way kind of broke me out of some of the literalism of it. But at the same time, I find myself very, very compelled to the causal nature of things. Just, the not assigning blame, but like, things happen, you can tell what caused what, you can tell what's going to cause what, and eventually you get good enough at predicting what's going to happen. And so then it's like, for me, that becomes my social inability to read social cues, having preemptively prepared things that I can kind of pull out of the repertoire and use, to avoid the awkward. It's kind of what you guys were talking about earlier about blending in. And that ties back to my stepson, who I helped him with some of my ways of, figuring things out. I was like, here, I learned how to make this the spear, as it were. Let me show you how to make the spear. And in this case, the spear represents his ability to get along with people. He had a good group of friends. He was not socially awkward, even though he still had moments of things. He'd be like, hey, can I talk to you about something? Why did it work like this? And, but to be much more functional, he's actually presently going for a bachelor's in music at a university. So
very cool.
Yeah, it's a whole thing I'm not getting into with the situations, and I don't really talk to anybody anymore. I know he's doing that. He's succeeding, which is great. I take no credit. That's all on him.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So that's my experience with it. It's just, my employment wise, I did pizza delivery. I memorized. I was always, as a kid, we would do the standardized testing in schools, and I always tested very high on like comprehension skills, spatial reasoning, things like that. So I ended up doing pizza delivery, newspapers, and like I've got 7 counties around here. This is several hundred square miles of back roads that I just could drive along and know where I'm at and where I'm going.
Yeah.
And hereditarily, my mom's dad was a mail carrier, and he knew the names and addresses of all these people years after he retired that he delivered his mail to every day. And it's kind of the same. So it's interesting how much hereditary stuff there is, and at the same time, there's a little bit of environmental factors, because actual they call the autism spectrum and not actual autism. There is a distinguishment between the two. Supposedly, autism is an inborn thing. It is a legitimate biological neurodivergence of how your brain, is.
Yes. In fact,
and spectrum is more environmental at the beginning or whatever.
Yeah. The more extreme cases. Simon Baron-Cohen was actually in neurology, the brain structure, and he was suggesting that it was a hypermaleized brain, the autism and Asperger's, the extreme end of the spectrum. He was making
like masculine male.
Yeah, well, yes, but now this is the thing I have to be careful about. Hang on, because there's a region of the brain which is either larger or smaller in men, and I forget which way around it is. But the interesting thing was that in autistic and Asperger's, it was an extreme example of that, either very, very much larger or smaller than you would expect. And even in the women with autism and Asperger's, that on the extreme end, that was true. And also there's a skew in the numbers of people with autism and Asperger's as well. It's about 75% male, 25% female. But in that 25%, there was this hyper-maleized aspect of the brain was in their brains too. So there's something, there's a neurological cause in there, which has been caused probably, and of course has come from their genetics and their genetic predisposition towards the condition. There you go. That's. I'm not an expert, but that is a little bit of expert knowledge I got secondhand.
Well, and I would agree. I mean, that's, if you look at it, not to be, I'm not putting any judgment or assignment of anything or whatever, but it kind of, Temple herself is just, several of the women that I know around here that are of the same kind of, they speak like her, they seem to think like her in some ways, as they're women who are into women. And I'm not saying that it's a stereotypical thing, but in her case, she kind of almost seems like a dude. But like I said, it's not, not trying to, in the modern way of thinking, make an assumption per se.
Yeah, and also that hypermaleized bit of the brain does not necessarily mean anything to do with their gender preferences either. But it's certainly causing them to think in a different way than. Yeah, it's certainly causing them to think in an autistic way. That's for sure. But what if, for more details on this, because I'm talking from knowledge I gained about 12 years ago, go and look at Simon Baron-Cohen's website, because he is a highly prominent researcher in the field of autism and Asperger's. His stuff, it may have well been changed since I looked at it last, and he would be the source to look at. Do not get him muddled up with Sacha Baron-Cohen, who is because that's his brother.
Are you serious? They are related.
Oh yeah, they are related.
I saw the name and I was like, cousins, distant, I don't know.
But... No, they're brothers, and obviously quite close in age as well. Yeah, and in fact,
that makes sense.
He looked quite a bit like him when I saw him in the lecture, which is why in that video I was thinking, is that him helping on the MRI scanner? It was a lot younger in that video.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe it was. But anyway, I would recommend go and look at his work, because he's done a lot of stuff still controversial. I mean, he's doing brain scans and imaging of brains, but
it's an edgy territory, because there are schools of thought that so many things are constructs or choices, or can be malleable or whatever, and with no indication as to bias. Just these are, then you're encroaching on something that is more of a, okay, but this particular thing happens to actually be a literal physical difference. And then the question is there going to be an othering?
Yeah, I know this is a
human rights thing.
This problem in Western thought goes back quite a long way. I'd say it goes all the way back to John Locke, who was insistent that human beings were a tabula rasa, were a blank slate. And that meant basically you could mold them to be whatever you liked. And even in the 17th century when he was writing, 17th, 18th century when he was writing, it was not true. There was evidence around you could look at that there were commonalities between people in different countries that was not anything to do with where they had been brought up. Languages might be different, but they all had a language. There was clearly a deep structure to language. We had something in our brains that predisposed us to language. It wasn't we were born with no ability for that whatsoever. And anyway, it just pisses me off that Locke has so much. People just praise Locke to the end of the earth, but his philosophy is weak as dishwater. And by the way, on that topic, go and read Leibniz's response to his philosophical work, because Leibniz is just tore him a new one, basically, in his essay
Dawkins, with his whole, the concept of memetics, the fact that evolution has a shared, there's an information shared thing that kind of negates that whole fully malleable. It's like some of this you can and some of this you can't. If you've got, the instincts are half that. It's what you're shown how to do and it's what you learn how to do, but also it's what your type has been grown to be able to do.
And of course, ironically, we've also evolved mechanisms that allow us to override a lot of those inherited genetic predispositions as well. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't mean they're not there.
Yeah, no, it's very much that's, it's way more nuanced than just nature versus nurture. There's animal versus just person or whatever. And that's, as I mentioned Dune in the chat there, that's kind of, the same thing.
In Dune, did you say?
Yes. The what they call the Gom Jabbar. It's the test of they put his hand in the box and it's pain by nerve induction. And it's like, if you pull your hand out of this box, they put this needle in your neck and you die before you hit the ground. You have to prove that you're not an animal because you're set the rule and you may have superpowers. It's basically how it goes.
Right.
And so it's a hero's journey story initially, but the deeper things in the series that are laid out afterward, a lot more just general self-discovery stuff that into at the moment, but an excellent story for sure. But there is some of that. There's your humanity is your own dominance or interaction with your animal side or your instinct or however it's
Yes. Hang on a second. Anita's still trapped without a microphone, but I need to bring in someone who has some more direct expertise. He may not be an expert in the field, but he definitely has direct personal experience of this. So excuse me 1 second. Greetings, Salty Tracker.
Hey, I'm definitely not an expert in the field, as you would say, but
none of us are.
We do have a lot of autism in our family, and
right.
So my daughter's on the spectrum, as is my son. And while I'm not diagnosed, we believe my father was as well, and my wife has her suspicions that I may be.
I have those suspicions too.
Yeah, thanks. So the interesting thing, like you were talking about the hyper masculine part of the brain, how the
this is Simon Baron-Cohen's research. I must press that. Nothing to do with me, and I do not know this stuff. Go and look at Simon Baron-Cohen's work, but carry on.
Right. And I apologize if I sound a little out. I literally woke up moments ago. I meant to get up before the beginning of the show, and I just my apologies.
No problem.
One thing that's interesting is that there's a direct correlation with men and women in general, that women are better at perceiving and expressing emotion, while men are actually better at perceiving and manipulating spatial objects. So if you were to give a man and a woman a puzzle involving moving blocks and putting them in a specific pattern, men would beat women on average consistently. While there's another test they use where they show a series of faces with different emotional expressions that are very subtle, women are very good at picking those out, while men are not.
In general, we are talking, of course, all of this in general.
These are studies that show generalities between the male and female brain.
Most people are, of course, in the middle, and it's difficult to differentiate. But it's certainly at the edges, it gets very. You can see the differences. Yes.
Well, and that's the interesting. When you have someone who is on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, one thing that's very consistent is their perception and expression of emotion goes off the chart as far as their outliers as being poor, and on the spatial example, there are outliers as being far superior.
Yep.
And so
I think
it really is like you have being on the spectrum is almost like what you say a hyper male brain.
Part of the brain, not all the brains, but one specific.
Right. It's not that obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, I understand we're not talking about sexual identity or anything like that. I'm just talking about
exactly
as far as that particular function of the brain. Emotion versus spatial manipulation, and that's why, as Kiosk was mentioning earlier, as far as being socially awkward, that's why that people on the spectrum tend to be much more socially awkward, because they have a more difficult time perceiving and expressing emotion. And to this day, for example, me, Dr. Alex, I have a very sarcastic sense of humor, right? I like to poke fun. I like to, any opportunity I get, if you ask me a question, I think the answer is obvious, I'll tell you the opposite of what's true. That kind of thing. And my son, to this day, always has to ask if I'm being sarcastic, because
he can't read it.
If he asks a question and I give an answer that confuses him, he'll be like, "Oh, okay, is he kidding?" because he doesn't perceive the subtle inflections that you make when you're making a sarcastic remark or something.
I used to have to do that as well quite a lot. I had to both explain the sarcasm, and it wasn't because I was explaining my own sarcasm, because I assumed they wouldn't get it, because I before up to a certain age wouldn't have got it myself either. And again, I'm not saying I'm autistic or Asperger, because I've never been tested. And there are many things and people who would say I was not, for various reasons. I can certainly agree with that too. But I definitely had a lot of things I can sympathize and empathize, and even had the same responses to. So yeah, it took me a while. It was liberation when I finally was able to use humor to defend myself in school at the end of around 16-ish, when I suddenly, first of all, didn't care about what other people thought, which was a big flip of a switch in my brain, and two, was able to see the things that they were doing and why they found them funny, also why they found them hurtful, and then suddenly use them like weapons. And I was like, okay, bang, 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 you try that and I will cut you to shreds now. And I suddenly, I got sarcasm and got it in a terrible, dangerous way. I could use it like a weapon suddenly. But it was definitely not something that was there initially.
Yeah,
well, and I would raise
it.
Go ahead.
So sorry.
No, go ahead, Kel.
That's all. Oh, yeah, I was raised on Python, so I got sarcasm early. My thing was shyness.
Mm-hmm.
Joshua. Sorry.
No, that's and that is something like my son is extremely shy. Like if you bring him into a situation where he doesn't know somebody, he's definitely not one to like be comfortable in a situation like that. And he and so he's just like, he really doesn't like being in a situation where he's with unfamiliar people. And if we're at a restaurant or some other situation where you're expected to speak to someone, particularly someone who you do not know, he feels very uncomfortable in those situations. Like we always have to, he has a tendency to mumble and not look at somebody, and we're like, you have to speak up so they can hear what you want. But that shyness factor just kicks into overdrive for him. Do you feel that way, Kiosk?
A bit, yeah. My thing was like having maybe that's what comes to the mumbling. I didn't really mumble. I just, if I couldn't get it out, I couldn't say it. Make the mouth feel. But what you're describing from what I've heard sounds like more of a so-called real autism. Like it's my thing with this, the anxiety comes from the fact that I'm going to have to talk, start, or stop.
Right.
I'm at right now. That's why I'm like just stopping.
Sorry, I lost a lot of that, Kiosk. But are you
trying to find a good spot for? Yes, can you hear me? Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah,
did remind me. It's the exhaustion of having to talk. That's my social anxiety.
Here's a little story for you. I learned to cut my own hair, so I didn't have to have conversations at the barbers.
Wow.
Let me tell you.
Very
comfortable. I understand. I understand that.
Yeah.
I that's why
that's why you don't cut your hair. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Well, I've got kind of a matte / dreadlock thing going, but yeah, I mean it's kept. It's just different. But going back to that, Catcher in the Rye reference, the line that got used for the anime Ghost in the Shell, they had a character called the Laughing Man that was citing J.D. Salinger, and it ended up being kind of an autistic dude who was in control of a library, was the guy behind all of this. But the quote from Catcher in the Rye was, what I thought I'd do was, I thought I'd become one of those deaf mutes, like literally the people saying hi, I'm deaf, That way I wouldn't have to have any stupid, useless conversations with an expletive deleted out of that. That's kind of the line.
I've got a question for Salty Trekker now he's here. Did Joshua watch the video?
No, he is he's secluded in his room at the moment, which is like his personal castle. Like that's
of course
where he goes. That's like his personal safe space where nobody else treads, and so he spends a lot of time there. However, one thing that I do want to point out to anybody that may be watching this, as far as a difficult time with people who struggle with being on the spectrum a little bit, or maybe borderline on the spectrum, and that is that when we look at autism and Asperger's, a lot of people think of it as like a condition, like having a third arm, or having some kind of disease. The problem there is that imagine for a minute that we were separating people based on, like, everybody had either brown or blonde hair, and so men had a tendency to have brown hair and women had a tendency to have blonde hair. But then you had this small percentage of people that had brilliantly white hair, and those people are the people that have extremely dark black hair, and those are the people that we would call on the spectrum. And so how do you what's the gradation? At what point is the hair color put you on the spectrum versus being quote unquote normal? And how do you ask someone how they feel when they have a slightly lighter or slightly darker hair color than the quote norm, right? And so it's one of those things where
it's definitely a continuum. Yes.
Yeah, you ask somebody what it's like to be autistic. You say, well, what's it like to not be autistic? It's it's not the it's not something that is a very obvious and very discernible difference between you and the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
It's just one thing about you is slightly more prevalent.
Yeah, I mentioned a friend of mine who got himself tested and came out the wrong side of the line for being officially autistic, but he was still self-identify as that, and I don't want to argue with him because he exhibits things that mean he's definitely, as we all are, on the spectrum, and definitely shifting towards the end of what we'd say is autistic. Right. So yeah.
What's the difference between the quote unquote low side of normal and the high side of Asperger's, or the low side of Asperger's and the high side of autism? And the answer is the subjective opinions of a doctor. That's the difference.
Well, by the way,
like my case.
Sorry. By the way, that video will be on YouTube forever, hopefully. So Joshua can watch it at his leisure whenever he likes.
So you don't.
But I hope he
get a strike on it.
But I hope he doesn't get. Yeah, if he doesn't get a copyright, right. I hope he doesn't get scared by the bit halfway through where I had to speed up the audio and put a weird echo on to get it viewable by everyone.
It seemed tolerable. What was I going to say? Well, okay. What? Salty, what were you just saying? That was about. Oh, if it was important, it will come back.
Okay.
Something that I have seen on that I think may have actually come from Simon Baron Cohen was the idea that it's possible that a strong male with the hyper male or whatever part in the autism would be the dude that would go off into the woods and come back with a carcass to feed everybody and was able to cope with just being by themselves out doing the thing. That was kind of a possible evolutionary of what some autism is. And, I can appreciate from my circumstances. I live on an acreage with woods, and when I go out and get firewood or track animals, it's like I'm there. I don't have to learn how to do this.
And I'll tell you, where you live sounds like absolute paradise to me, while it sounds like a nightmare to many others.
Yeah, Iowa is God's country, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and so like if anybody that knows me well personally knows that like if I were to live, if you said, "Oh, where do you want to live?" It'd be like, "Well, I want that house that's up on the side of that mountain that you have to have a helicopter to get to." That kind, that's where I want to live. Where my wife is like, "Are you kidding? I want to live in downtown in the biggest city on the planet." That's so. So we compromise and we live on the outer edges of a moderately sized city. So that's
I'm
uh,
10 miles, 30,000 city. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to say.
the
Sorry, go on. Salty, did you watch the video before the stream?
no, because long story short, on Friday, due to an insane, well, you were there briefly for it, but due to an insane situation that came up on my live stream, my Friday night 2-hour live stream, it ended up going for 9 hours. And then on Saturday, so I got about 3 hours of sleep Saturday before we had to go and do some stuff Saturday night. And then I couldn't sleep Saturday night, so I only got a couple hours of sleep between that and my live stream this morning. And so then I conked out. And even though I had an alarm to come join you on the thing, I managed to crawl out of bed moments before you saw me come up. So I only got to hear a few minutes of the kiosk before I joined myself. So I apologize. That's my lack of preparation might be glaring, but I apologize on that.
But you were already aware of Temple Grandin, weren't you?
What's that?
You were already aware of Temple Grandin, weren't you, I think?
The name sounds familiar, but I probably have to watch the video too.
Maybe not. Then yeah, you should watch it. In fact, I really encourage you to watch that. I put it on here for a reason. It's incredibly powerful and strong description of the condition from someone with the condition who has not just, who's flown with it and used the strength she's gained from it to extreme advantage in terms of understanding both human and animal psychology, herself included. It's amazing what she's done.
Autistic cowherder lady with the hugging machine.
Yes, it's brilliant.
Alex, you were saying that you had not seen the biopic.
No, I didn't know they had made a biopic for her, but now I'll have to go find it.
One of the things that I have happen is not only do I get the weird mood swings at high speeds when I'm very stressed, but I also get increasingly face blind when I'm under high stress, which is just strange. Look like familiar people. Like, wait, is that so and so's cousin or something? Because they kind of look, and they don't look anything like them. My brain is just on that part, and that's like a real neurodivergence thing that is not, personality traits that act a certain way. Fathers act like they're. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's an autism. It's when this is like your perception of reality is affected by it. That's autism, because reality is what your mind is showing you of the entire experience, because you can't. The more autistic you are, the more exposed to some of that. It's like overwhelming, and you just shut down too. But the biopic was Claire Danes, and I had her face blopped out, but I had Tilda Swinton and/or Kate Blanchett as who
the
might
face
have played it.
Describing that's the bipolar, not that's from the bipolar, yeah.
No, that's that is an autism spectrum or autism thing. Is the face blindness, the rapid mood swings is the bipolar thing. I got it on either end of that. There's a spectrum between those two types of things. Got it on both, but
right.
Yeah, so it's really horrifying, because then it's like, I'm just walking through the world bothered about something, and my moods are like all over the place. And while I'm surfing that, I'm looking at people that strangers look familiar, and people I know are like, I'm like, oh, there's, and then they think I'm have some kind of an issue because I just ignored them and walked by, and it's like, oh, I didn't recognize that as you. Like my coworkers in their clothes, I would not know it's them unless they came up to me and said, "Hey, Rob," and I'd be like, oh, hi, like that. It's like. And that does not typically occur in non-autism or Asperger's situations. That's mostly it's a product of that, I guess.
That's actually a really interesting way to put it, the face blocking thing, because one of the things that helps clue you in to autism in young children is the fact that they do not recognize even like the existence of other people.
Yes.
That, and so it's almost like they literally believe they're the only living thing in the universe, and that face blocking thing could be a part of that. That the fact that they don't, since if you imagine an infant, the quote unquote normal infant will of course immediately bond and recognize parents and family and that kind of thing, to be more comfortable around those people. Where someone with autism, they just see things.
Yeah, Temple Grandin was describing it them being virtually transparent. Right. Other people were virtually transparent to her. They were there in the world, but they registered almost not at all.
Right. There would be no more person than your couch.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so one of the first things to, and something my daughter did with my son, which was wonderful when he was very little, was kind of forcing him to interact with her, so that he could begin to realize that he's not alone in the universe.
Yes.
Attachment is necessary at that age. Attachment is necessary. Right. The only instances of things like face blindness occurring that don't seem to be with autism are in terms of like serious reactive attachment disorders, which I'm not an expert on, but I've talked to people who claim to have been at some point. But the idea basically being that there is something that legitimately destroyed the emotional bond with mother at a formative age, was never fixed. It becomes extremely pathological. It's the worst of the dark triads kind of thing when those happen. Right. And that there is also sometimes a face blindness there, which may add to the psychopathy, I think, in that case. Which really isn't like that, thankfully, but I have my own issues with a covert narcissist mother. So, I mean...
an interesting thing about how it manifests is, like, even the doctors, when Joshua was little, they would say, well, are you sure... Like we would call him and he wouldn't come, or we'd try to talk to him and he wouldn't engage. And they'd say, well, are you sure he doesn't have a hearing problem? Are you sure he really understands that you're talking to him? And, the answer to that was simple. You go to the TV, you turn it on, and his favorite song comes on, and bam, he'll come from anywhere in the house in 2 seconds and be standing in front of it. Yes. So it's just, And so it's definitely not...
Should know to jump up and go to mom, right? But instead just stay sitting.
Right. Yeah. So if we call him, it's just a sound. But if it's a sound, one of the very few things that he really zooms in on and attaches to, he can hear that from anywhere. So it's not it's not a problem with his senses as far as being able to detect things. And, and it's certainly not a problem with IQ. He's very intelligent. It's a problem where basically registering other people and interacting with other people causes a lot of problem. And so autism is one of those really strange conditions as far as trying to understand it. And the problem is that people that start to think how to cure it or something, well, how do you cure being left-handed?
Yeah, no, it's not like that. It's not like that.
Right. Yeah, it's something that you just have to get to where we can understand how to properly integrate autism into our community, as opposed to trying to change what autism is.
This is another one of the great things that Temple Grandin has done, and also Rimland as well helped towards it. They were not trying to cure autism Asperger's. They were trying to help them live the most productive and happy lives they could. The things that she has done is to make herself happy as an extremely autistic person. Rimland was trying to make sure people were dealing with it as something that's inherited, and it's there and it doesn't change. So you need to know how to integrate these people, or they need to be helped to integrate with the world as best they can. And certainly they need to be able to access things in a way that they can access them.
Well, another interesting correlation with autism is that, because you mentioned how it being hereditary, and that there is and it seems to be something in the brain that, as generations go down, increases. And the reason I say that is because there's a huge disproportionate amount of people who are on the spectrum having a father who works a technical job.
Yep, you missed me. I said that in the chat before you came in, but yes, that's very true.
Yeah, and my father was was an engineer for Chevron. I worked in the tech field myself for Verizon Wireless and Comcast, and I was working in the engineering departments of them, and of Comcast, and then and so it definitely does. There does seem to be some kind of link there to people who excel at a technical type of position. And in fact, that's something that I think as a society we should be looking at, like people on the spectrum can work positions that require a high level of technical expertise, but have a low level of social interaction.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, Simon Baron-Cohen, who's done a lot of research in this field, as we were talking about, the whole hypermaleized stuff, talked about how there's a ridiculous predisposition if you have two technical people having children. So if both of them are engineers, you have a stupidly high chance of having an autistic child. So yeah,
it's almost like it's a gene that piles up the more it's exposed.
Yeah, it's clearly it's probably if it's recessive, it sounds to be almost like it's a very strongly expressed recessive gene or combination of it. It'll be a combination of genes, but yeah, having two of them with those recessive genes together clearly is multiplying the effect and making them close to dominant. So yeah, this is. I mean, I'm not a geneticist, but
I think I can speak to that because I know that some of the traits of the females that are definitely like biologically autistic, often there's like a hair thing that happens. And my mother's mother had, she keeps it short for a reason and has wigs. I would say my mom's probably one of the 25%. She rests in peace. And she was able to do anything technical. She got science degrees in college. My dad was a machinist for 30 years. He was in the Navy for that. And then he got a job at the railroad. And then when they closed that down, he became a minister. And he took the same kind of mentality to the Bible. He was very historical about a lot of it.
You cut out for that. So what did you say was a trait that came through?
The technical skills. My dad was a machinist mate in the Navy, and then he was
identified something else that was expressing itself, but I must have missed it or misunderstood.
My mom was on the female autism spectrum, I believe, and she was collegiately educated. Is that the wind was blowing and it might have messed with the sound. I don't get good signal in my house. So it's hard. Was that clear?
I think so. So yeah, you're basically backing up what we're saying, that yes, if you have multiple people with technical backgrounds together, then
anecdotally,
yes, yeah.
But that's the thing is there's so little real study on it, and so much of people coming together outside and being like, yeah, we all kind of see the same thing. It's an unscientific consensus. Probably could be made scientific if there was funding.
Well, I'm going to do my usual fallback and say, go and check out Simon Baron-Cohen, not Sacha Baron Cohen, Simon Baron-Cohen. Check out his website, check out his research, because this is the thing he has been doing for at least 20 years. So not nobody is doing it. I'm a double negative of the day. Somebody is at least looking at this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe I have read some of his stuff before, and yeah, that's something that the more that they're able to study, the more it changes. There is a lot. It's a deep subject. It's very inherently part of it. I think is like we are having somebody study the actual ongoing evolution of humanity.
Yes. Also, if you find you're looking at a guy with a stupid moustache wearing spandex, it's the wrong Baron-Cohen.
Hey, that guy's really smart too. If you've seen his stuff, you got to know that guy is really smart.
Oh yeah, they're obviously brothers.
He just applies it different.
Yeah. On that note, we have been going for an hour and a half. Normally, Old Media Guy's the one who pulls the plug about 30 minutes ago. I think it'll have to be me this time. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Salty? Because you've been on the least amount of time. I think you need the most time to say more.
Well, no, I just wish that I would have been up earlier. I apologize for that. And I'll tell you, one thing, another, and I know you know about this, Dr. Alex, but I just think it's humorous, but also displays kind of an interesting view of how a person on the spectrum kind of processes certain types of information. We live in the state of Tennessee, which is in the southern United States. However, up until about 9 years ago, we lived on the West Coast, specifically Portland, Oregon, where my daughter still lives. And my son loved it here, as far as, because the reason we moved here is because there was a high school here that was one of the best in the country for kids on the spectrum, and we wanted him to be able to have a shot at getting a decent education. And he liked it here. He liked his teachers. He thought that the life here was pretty good, but he did not appreciate the Southern accent at all.
Your son, yes, sorry,
yes. And so, and in fact, he's right next to me now. Hey, Joshua.
Hello.
If you can, I don't know if you heard him, but he says hello.
I heard him. Hello, Joshua.
Actually, Joshua, if you stand like right here, he'll be able to see you, I think. And you see yourself in the.
I can see the middle of his body. Yes.
Yes.
I can see his elbow now.
Yeah. There. Can you almost a little lower. You're bringing your face
lower. We have to see his face. I can see his shoulder, which is pretty good. Yeah. Hello, Joshua.
There he is.
I can see him. Hello. I got him. Well, half a face anyway.
So this is Joshua. Yeah. So Joshua did not appreciate the Southern accent at all. No. So his solution was to study and adapt, and now he speaks with an English accent. And in fact, he doesn't even remember how to speak without an English accent. Isn't that true?
Well, it's. Well, honestly, I'm not really sure what my accent fully is. It does switch. I think it kind of switches between different sort of accents. I'm not sure.
It's not a bad approximation to an English accent, though. Not bad.
Oh,
he could be the next Doctor.
I remembered what I was going to say earlier. Ties into that. I found that kind of sing-song tone, saying hi to someone you think might be on spectrum is kind of, I don't want to say disarming way to kind of ask them around you. And it's kind of the same thing as the familiarity tone. That was what we were talking about that I couldn't remember. And
the kiosk has now turned into a comedy bit where the microphone cuts in and out all the time. But Joshua
accents and song are a similar part of the brain. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Joshua and Salty, while you're sitting there, we were trying to wind up, but now I can say to both of you, I'd encourage you to go back and watch the video with Temple Grandin in, because it is amazing. And I think you'll enjoy it. The number of animals is awesome.
Honestly, I have heard of her, but I'm honestly not that interested in her.
You might be interested in this video, though. It's
how long is the actual video?
The video's 50 minutes, 45 minutes. Not very long.
Yeah, so you can give it a shot, and if you don't want to, you don't have to finish it. So it's not.
It's got me in it as well, so that might increase the.
See, it's got Dr. Alex in it. You like him.
And by the way, she built a hugging machine. She built a hugging machine. It's pretty cool.
Indeed, which is always cool. Okay, on that note, I'm going to be harsh and cut us off. So thank you, the kiosk, for joining us. Thank you, Salty and Joshua, for being here. It's awesome. And if you'd like to plug your channels now would be the last 2 minutes. Off you go.
After you.
Well, actually, I'm currently on the Salty Trekker channel. That will be changing in the not too distant future. But once that happens, I'll be sure to let you guys know. But for right now, you can find me over on Salty Trekker. I usually live stream on Sunday mornings, Monday and Friday nights, and Thursday afternoons-ish. And of course, that varies with what country you might be in, because if you're in Australia, then I'm streaming Sunday afternoon, Monday and Friday mornings, I think it is. I get confused, but yeah. But you can find me there a lot.
Brilliant.
That was Salty Trekker, like Star Trek?
Yes, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So
okay, that broke up on the thing. I wanted to be clear on that too. Cool.
Yes.
Awesome.
Kiosk, do you have a channel?
Yes, my name is The Kiosk. It's a channel. If you find me in the comments below this video, that's my channel with my videos.
I will stick it into the description as well.
My most recent thing I would recommend would either be the thing on informed consent, or I've got one that is several different ways to access a brief story told hypothetically. It's a parable about fire and prevention of fire, and a pretty whack scientific community telling people to throw gas on it.
Ah.
It's a fun story. Check it out. It's on my channel. It's a cool story with a happy ending, is what it's called.
Cool.
Very cool.
But yeah, the kiosk is my channel, and that's what it.
And Joshua has a little channel too.
Yeah, I was going to say, Joshua, the scarved insect. Do we have it?
Yes.
So in the Scarf Insect world, Joshua posts his peculiar sense of humor in the form of animation.
Yeah, just
which are awesome.
Mostly animation, but sometimes I do other stuff if I feel like it.
Brilliant. Okay, on that note, thank you all for coming, and also the chat and everyone who watched and also watched the video. Thank you for all being here, and there will be another one next week, and it'll be about apes. It'll be the Ape Genius, I think.
Look for the video with the firewood in it.
So it's about Lore Reloaded.
Sorry, I missed most of the autism talks.
That's okay. Well, so did we, because I was asleep.